All right, I'd like to welcome you all to the CSS seminar series of 2025 2026 academic year. Today we have the great pleasure of hosting Dr. Fuat Kına, who was actually with us at the Center for Computational Social Sciences at Koç University for a while. So it is indeed a great pleasure to have him with us today. Before I give the floor to Dr. Kına, I'd like to also briefly introduce him to you. Fuat Kına is an assistant professor at the Institute of Population and Social Research at Marmara University, where he also serves as the department head of social research. His research focuses on computational social sciences, causal inference, social movements, welfare systems, and comparative political sociology. Before joining Weimar University, he worked as a postdoctoral researcher and instructor at, as I said, at the Center for Computational Social Sciences here at Koç University. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Boğaziçi University and completed his graduate studies with research on welfare policies and rural social movements in Brazil and India. His recent work examines welfare politics, social assistance programs, and the political dynamics of development. Without further ado, the floor is yours, Hocam.
Thanks a lot, Hocam. Before starting, let me share my screen again. Yes, sorry. Okay. Let me shrink this. Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Meri Hocam, for introducing me. So I may not really count as an outsider to this audience since I regularly work, communicate, and do research with most of you, but I still want to say how much I appreciate this opportunity to present my work, one of my recent work here in such a wonderful research environment. So today I would like to share a study that I published last summer in New Perspectives on Turkey. So the title of my study is Exploring the Ideological Landscape of Twitter Users in Turkey, Political and Cultural Access. So at its core, the study asks a fairly simple question. So can we map the ideological divisions of political society in Turkey not through the voter surveys or allied discourses, but through the digital traces left by ordinary citizens themselves? And if we can, what those that map actually tell us? So my research relies on the Politus database, which is probably familiar to most of you as well. So an ERC-funded computational social science platform, which is designed to track public opinion in Turkey using some state-of-the-art CSS tools. So let me go through. Yes. So before I get into the structure of this talk, let me ask you something before starting. So if I ask you to map political society in Turkey, let me ask, where would you start? So most of us probably would draw a single line, left to right. And if so, where would you put, for example, grassroots of CHP or HDP blocks, political blocks, I mean? So the question is that, would that be enough to grasp the existing mainstream cleavages in the overall politics in Turkey? So, and here is a secondary but deeper question then. By politics in Turkey, whose politics shall we consider or we can consider? The politicians or the public? So for politicians, distribution of parliamentary seats might tell us something, yes, as always. But if we are interested in dealing with the broad public, how we are gonna map these ideologies through different subdivisions, such as provinces of Turkey Or what about hard to reach orientations, political orientations, I mean, like Kurdish national movements or else? So is it possible to reach that data via national representative survey? That might be a third question, for example. So I want to leave these questions as open-ended right now, but we will come back to these issues, the issues raised here in the upcoming minutes. So I have organized this talk around 7 sections. The first thing, so the question and motivation, essentially why we need to move beyond the both elite-centered frameworks and binary classifications. Then the Politus database, I'll explain what distinguishes it from the other data sources, the other data collecting option collection methodologies maybe. And third, the methodology here I applied. And I will introduce a two-stage transformation process that I applied for this research specifically. And there are lots of MA students among this audience, if I'm not mistaken, and I see familiar names here. And some of them I know uses Politus database, already maybe run lots of analysis with that database. So this might be a good guideline for those as well, how to deal with intrinsic biases of social media data. And so this section will be followed by PCA and cluster analysis. And then I will present the findings, 2 axes that emerge from PCA, and 3 distinct ideological clusters in Turkey that emerge from cluster analysis. And then I will present the findings, the 2 axes. After presenting the findings, I will introduce a brief discussions on 5 interpretive insights on those findings. Yeah. So we have a very rich literature on political ideology in Turkey, and also lots of ideology detection research done in CSS literature globally, I mean. So, but if we look at those from a critical perspective, 3 significant gaps become visible. So the first gap is elite bias. So it's more likely a conceptual gap. So the vast majority of the work on previous research on ideology focus on party programs, leader speeches, or intellectual traditions maybe. That is, of course, important, but public ideology, the ideology that ordinary citizens embrace, transform, or reinterpret in their daily practice usually falls outside the scope of analysis, I mean scholarly analysis. So the second gap then is methodological. The international CSS literature often treats ideology as a binary classification task, left versus right, conservative versus liberal, or democratic versus Republican. So this framing may work to some extent, as in the US case, for example. But in countries with more complex, multidimensional political structures, such as Turkey, it becomes really seriously reductive. Another gap, then, the third gap, is electoral bias. So most of existing studies build their data and also their whole data collection pipelines all around election-related data, or at least politicians-related data. So they reach ordinary users through politicians' follower networks, for instance. And this already builds a bias against contentious politics, against protest movements and everyday forms of political expression, I mean. But public ideology, when we talk about public ideology, it doesn't only surface at the ballot box. It surfaces on the streets, in online debates, in daily confrontations as well. So we need a bottom-up framework, maybe, which methodologically requires a more holistic data collection pipeline. So the central question for this reason, for all of these reasons, I want to pose is, how can we map the dominant ideological divisions in Turkey's public in a way that captures both electoral and contentious politics? So to answer this question, I rely on Politus database. So Politus is the product of an ERC-funded project led by Erdem Yörük, and I have been part of the team. So I use this infrastructure both from within and as a researcher. So it was an ERC proof of concept grant. So the starting point is that we collected 100 most followed accounts in Turkey, so which together reach roughly 55 million followers in total, I mean. So we removed duplicates. There are lots of duplicates there, and bots and organization accounts as well. And then we reached out 6 millions. And from this pool, we first identified approximately 4 million users uh, for, for whom we could detect province level location, which is extremely important, specifically for this research. I will explain why. Then we filtered out inactive users as well. There are lots of inactive users in our database, which left us with approximately 1 million active users. And finally, in order to be able to focus on a more targeted subsection, I mean, political community of in social media, we kept only those who had posted or interacted with at least one ideological tweet. And the final sample then, 480K users and approximately 53 million tweets. So the deep learning component of this pipeline is also worth highlighting. So Politus doesn't rely on traditional lexicon-based methods, but on transformer-based language models. And these models were trained on a manually annotated corpus of 10,000 tweets labeled by graduate students in social and political sciences. F1 macro scores on the test set range between 70 to 90%, depending on the ideology, which is quite strong by the standards of text classification literature. And 8 ideologies were classified: Turkish nationalism, conservatism, Islamism, Kemalism, social democracy, socialism, feminism, and the Kurdish national movement. And also, I personally removed some of those ideologies in the Politus pipeline, like environmentalism and liberalism, since their scores are a bit lower than acceptable levels. So at the end, I had these 8 ideologies. And our core reference for defining these ideologies is well known and recently highly debated Cereyanlar book of Tanıl Bora. So the book was definitely not that popular while we decide to operationalize its framework. But I think it is the best of its kind for Turkey case. So since it provides the perfect complexity of political society in a very granular level, that was our main intention while focusing on that book. However, within the project, we reinterpreted his definitions, Tanıl Bora's definitions, to capture public ideological expression rather than allied discourse. I mean, we distilled our own definitions, distilled from the book, because if you read the book, you will see that the ideological pathways are described through most famous actors in the field, inevitably, I mean, so instead of ordinary people. For this reason, while operationalizing the definitions, we made some changes, but not much. So let me go through them briefly. Turkish nationalism as the foundational ideology of nation-state building provides a frame that intertwines with many other ideologies. So conservatism is skeptical of rapid social change and defends traditional norms. Islamism aims to structure state and society according to Islamic principles, and it is highly rooted in Milli Görüş tradition. Kemalism is the founding ideology of the Republic, resting on statism, secularism, and nationalism. So the book mostly, in fact, criticized for this kind of Kemalism conceptualization, by the way. So social democracy defends social justice and a welfare state within capitalism, while socialism calls for a more radical restructuring. Feminism challenges gender hierarchies, and Kurdish national movement articulates cultural and political rights or regional autonomy or more egalitarian social order, I mean, in terms of Kurdish people's right. So I want to flag one important methodological point here. When a Politus pipeline, Politus database, our models assign a tweet to a given ideology, it looks only for the explicit discursive element of that ideology. In other words, a tweet from an AKP supporter, for example, is not automatically tagged as conservative or Islamist. So the tweet itself must carry the grammar or discursive codes of that ideology in question. This is what prevents the database from falling into direct or indirect imputed attributions. I mean. Now let me turn to the methodology part. Social media data is not free of biases, definitely, quite the opposite. It systematically and frequently creates and introduces new versions of biases, lots of biases we have. So, but here, let's assume that it suffers from two fundamental problems. At least I reported that in my paper, measurement error and sampling error. So measurement error arises from the fact that some users post very frequently while others post nothing for weeks. So we call this vocal user problem. And sampling error stems from the fact that Twitter users uh, do not mirror Turkey's population. Some provinces are highly active on social media, while others have very low engagement. So it somehow um, uh, stands for representativeness bias. We cannot eliminate these problems entirely, by the way. So these are inherent biases of social media, but we can reduce their impact. So for this reason, I applied two-stage transformation. In the first step, I collapsed all tweet level predictions to user level. For each user, I compute the number of tweets associated with a given ideology divided by that user's total number of ideological tweets. So this ratio becomes the user's affinity score for that ideology. And the effect is to weight vocal and quiet users equally. It is essentially a proportion-based normalization. And in the second step, I aggregate these user level scores to province level by taking the mean of those scores. And this prevents Istanbul with its massive digital population from dominating the overall picture while still giving voice to the provinces with lower digital engagement, such as Hakkari. So the result is a matrix with 8 ideologies across 81 provinces. I then apply two standard exploratory techniques to this matrix. PCA, principal component analysis. So it reduces this 8-dimensional ideological space into a lower dimensional space, prioritizing the axes that capture the most of variance, the whole variance included in all these 8 dimensions. And second, cluster analysis. So it groups provinces based on their positions along these axes. And so these two methods complement each other. PCA extracts the structure and clustering reveals the patterns on top of PCA results. So let's go through the PCA results. So the first principal component, PC1, it explains 38% of the total variance. And the second component, PC2, explains 34%. And together, that is 73%, meaning that with just two dimensions, first and second dimensions, we can capture nearly 3/4 of the ideological variance across Turkey provinces. So that is substantial compared to the remaining 6 dimensions, I mean. So I want to underline one point here. So PC2 explains almost as much variance as PC1. So describing Turkey's ideological structure with a single axis would mean losing about 35% of the variation in the data. So the presence of the second dimension is not a matter of visual convenience. That is exactly what I mean. It is an empirical, meaningful structural finding. So what are these two axes then? PC1, as the loadings reveal, corresponds to the classical left-right spectrum. Socialism, social democracy, feminism, and Kurdish national movement load negatively on the axis. That is, they sit on the left. And Turkish nationalism load positively and sit on the right. What about PC2? So it tells us something quite different. secular religious axis. Islamism and conservatism load strongly on the religious pole, while Kemalism and a little bit feminism load strongly on the secular pole. And note that Kurdish national movement and Turkish nationalism both score slightly above the average on PC2, meaning both lean somewhat toward the religious side of Turkey's cultural polarization, let's say, uh, for different reasons, I mean. And here note that naming those axes, so I said left, right, and secular religious axis, so they're not coming from the empirical data. These are my theoretical choices based on my previous academic and intellectual research and the literature as well, or the intellectual debates as well, which is there are lots of books and textual documents written by Cemil Meriç, Tanıl Bora, İdris Küçükömer, etc. So depending on all those debates, previous debates, I named these axes. But definitely I consider the distribution of ideologies as well. So here you see the variance contribution of additional dimensions. So there is a giant gap between the second and third ones. That's why I designed two-dimensional space for ideological map in Turkey. And this is perhaps the most outstanding visual in the entire study, the most summarizing one. The horizontal axis is left-right, and the vertical axis is secular religious, as we talked. When we place the 8 ideologies on this plane, several striking patterns emerge. I prefer to name, as I said, left-right as so. On x-axis, I named those axes as left and right. And when I look at this dimension, I see it can be named as political dimension of ideology, and secular religious acts as a cultural dimension as well. So if you look at secular left quadrant, for example, feminism, socialism, and social democracy cluster here. But when we look at the religious left quadrant, the Kurdish national movement and Islamism slightly sit there. Feminism is also on the left, but somewhat closer to the secular side. Kemalism is secular, but closer to the right. Nationalism, Turkish nationalism, I mean. So it is unwavering address of the religious right, definitely in Turkey, I mean. And exactly on the religiosity axis, so we have conservatism, which can be considered as the middle ground between nationalism and Islamism, maybe. So, however, if I were to redesign this analytical framework from a purely theoretical perspective, I might prefer to rotate it slightly, as you see here. Probably, as most of you thought, that might make it more explanatory, have more explanatory power. But with such a rotation, Islamism would appear less left, Kemalism less right, and in practice, not much else would change. I would still be able to place everything else just as precisely. But one thing shouldn't be forgotten. My way of thinking is also influenced by a kind of allied bias. So, I mean, I tend to interpret Kemalism as more left and Islamism as more right based on the public figures and intellectuals I observe or politicians I observe. But this analysis was actually conducted directly using the everyday expressions of ordinary people and at the level of cities, I mean. So these are city level occurrences. When viewed from this perspective, it is important also to take into account the nationalist tendencies among the populations in cities where Kemalism is concentrated, as well as the fact that Islamism is often more prevalent in working class regions, like Gebze, for example. So we can revisit these points in the discussion section as well. But I definitely didn't include this rotated figure in the paper. It's just for me to present what I mean better for here. So PCA gave us the axis. Let us now turn to cluster analysis to see how provinces group on those axes. So I tested the optimal number of clusters. There are lots of tests. I used elbow method and gap statistics. I reported in those in the appendix, but I will not present here. They both point to three number. The first cluster is center right leaning but secular cluster. Its provinces are concentrated along the western and southern coast and metropolitans. Turkish nationalism high, Kemalism is relatively high, but religiosity is low, relatively low, I mean. And this is essentially the profile of CHP-aligned provinces. Urban, relatively modernized, secular, centrist, or maybe E-Party might work so might fit with this cluster. And the second cluster is also right-leaning again, but religious. Central Anatolia, much of Eastern Black Sea fall into this group. Turkish nationalism in higher here, just as the first cluster. And Islamism and conservatism scores rise noticeably. This is the geographic expression of the nationalist conservative synthesis that probably forms the natural base for AKP, AKP, MHP, Yeniden Refah Partisi, Büyük Birlik Partisi, and so on. And finally, we have one more cluster. The third cluster is perhaps the most interesting finding of this study, left-leaning but religious cluster. The Kurdish regions, I mean. So here the Kurdish national movement score reached its highest value, while Turkish nationalism drops clearly. Feminism and socialism scores are also higher in the other two compared to the other two clusters. It mainly aligns with definitely DEM party line or HDP line. But note this carefully, even though it's on the left, the cluster also sits close to the religious pole as well. So it doesn't fit the classical secular left expectation, but the distinctive historical and cultural composition of Kurdish politics defines that complexity. And note that we look at province level data and grassroots daily politics. I will always remind that nuance. So this slide displays the same three clusters in two ways. On the left, their distribution on PCA space, and on the right, their geographic distributions on the map of Turkey. Each dot here in the scatter plot, I mean, is a province, and three colors we have. So what strikes me here is that there is strong regional coherence. This tells us that clusters are not random artifacts of the algorithm. So they point to a structural pattern, a real structural geographical pattern in Turkey's political space or ideological space. And an important validation note to close this part, maybe the most important one. So these three clusters match the March 24 local election results with 81% accuracy, yes. So not the general elections, but the local election. So if you remember the local election results, it's pretty much similar to this distribution. Metropoles are in CHP line and etc. You may find the other details. So the map we derived from social media data and more importantly, election beyond or politicians beyond ideology data shows strong convergence with actual voting behavior in local elections. So these are public ideologies, not measured with respect to the electoral choices. That makes this picture a bit interesting. But honestly, the reviewers didn't like it. And then I carried this to a footnote in the published version, I mean. So I can agree that it seems a little less scientific, but journalistic findings, but it is important in my opinion. That's why I shared here. So let me now move to what these findings imply in terms of political sociology. So I will share 5 interpretive insights. First insight, so left-leaning ideologies clustered tightly together. Feminism, socialism, social democracy, and Kurdish national movements, they almost overlap in the ideological space. The right, by contrast, Turkish nationalism, conservatism, maybe Islamism, maybe Kemalism, whichever you include, is much more dispersed. So there are two ways to read this difference. Either the hegemonic space of the right is so wide that internal differentiation becomes possible, or the left undergoes a tighter ideological consolidation because of the maybe intersectionality of oppressions, class, gender, and ethnicity. In Sylvia Wolby's terms, from the perspective of intersectionality, those who experience multiple inequalities tend to experience their ideologies together. So second insight, the Turkish and Kurdish axis. So this axis is Turkey's defining line of left-right division as the main political cleavage. Specifically, since the June 7, 2015 elections and the collapse of the peace process, I mean, the earlier one, the axis has sharpened steadily and has become the organizing cleavage for left-right alignments in Turkey. Third, Kemalism is not left but secular right. So Tanıl also emphasizes, Kemalism's defining feature throughout the Republican history has been statism rather than leftism. So there were moments, especially in 70s, when the left Kemalist current grew stronger and found support at grassroots, as in the case of Karaoğlan, Bülent Ecevit, I mean. But empirically today, Kemalism sits a bit on the secular right. And again, it is because we run a province level analysis and we analyze ordinary people and we follow Tanıl Boras definition as well. Fourth insight, and perhaps the most contested one, Islamism leans slightly to the left of conservatism. So this may sound, again, a bit strange, but we are not here talking about the institutional Islamism of AKP. So if we consider current ümmetçilik, ümmetism, anti-imperialism, or the system outsider Islamism of the 70s or 90s, let's say 80s and 90s period, let's say, we see that Islamism has not always stayed within the right conservative camp. So when we look at provinces in Turkey, we may see religious left voter profile in Kurdish provinces. And also workers living in industrial regions are usually religious people. So when we take a look at Gebze, for example, the competing political blocs in Gebze, even in elections, I mean, even in the last local elections, remember Erkan Baş was the candidate of TİP there, and also in 19s as well. The main political competition was between Islamists versus socialists. So Gebze is the political castle of both Milli Görüş and socialist left, surprisingly. So I mean, I argue that it is somehow because of class-based composition of those places and also Kurdish people's broad religiosity, maybe. And therefore, the implication is that identifying Islamism with a single party or a single position might be an analytical mistake at grassroots level, I mean. Fifth and final insight. So politics in Turkey is not bipolar, but tripolar. Even at the water level, three poles, the secular center, the nationalist conservative right, and the Kurdish left religious pole, let's say. So they all have remained distinguishable for decades. This is a critical awareness, particularly for understanding alliance strategies and electoral behavior in Turkey. So let me summarize the contributions. First, the study challenges the habit of viewing Turkish ideologies in Turkey through a binary framework. It offers the first province-level quantitative mapping of public ideology in Turkey, covering 8 separate ideologies, 8 separate dimensions. It proposes a two-stage transformation methodology for mitigating this vocal user and location-based sampling biases, a CSS toolkit that can be useful in maybe similar research, maybe will be done by similar data. And it brings electoral and contentious politics into a single analytical frame. What about limitations? So despite our weighting, Twitter users, as always, do not fully represent the Turkish population. So the data ends in May 2023, which means we cannot track temporal change and individual level validation that I tried in another study didn't work. We couldn't validate ideologies at individual level. Instead, we have observed that people's behavioral and attitudinal reflections diverge. That's how we interpreted that mismatch. And also, I didn't note here, but there is the famous censorship bias. I didn't cite this in the paper, but this is, I think, the most important bias in social media while analyzing political trends, because especially this kind of bias increased a lot specifically after the electoral period that I run this analysis specifically. But even in that period, there was this kind of probably self-censorship based bias because people self-censor themselves, and that definitely decreases the reliability of findings extracted from social media. And still, two-stage transformation probably mitigated their impacts, depending on province level variances or assuming this bias can be distributed to all provinces equally. So if you assume that, then we can say that, yes, we mitigated that bias somehow. Here you see some concluding remarks, but I can just do not want to repeat what I said before. Thank you for your attention, and I can stop here. And any question, comment, and criticism are totally welcome. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Hocam. So we open our chat box for questions or comments. So you're more than welcome, our audience, to just type in your questions, but you can also just unmute yourself and ask. I'll be starting with the first question that I see here. I think that was sent as a direct message. Alpata Turkolu is asking, you mentioned you removed ideologies such as environmentalism and liberalism from the ideology set since their scores were less than acceptable. What can be considered acceptable scores in a project of this size?
I'm just trying to see it is written in chat or somewhere
It
else?
was sent to me. Let me actually just put it in the meeting
Ah,
group chat so you can also see it.
yeah, thank you, Hocam. Yes, what can be considered acceptable scores in the project of this size? The acceptable scores has changed. So while we are running these analysis, we were always talking about somewhere around, we were trying to navigate ourselves about 80 level, for example. But then LLM, I think, increased expectations of scholars to maybe I couldn't give you any specific measure on that, and I wasn't mainly responsible for developing these models, so I'm not sure about the exact numbers. But I can say more than 80, and if possible, more than 90 might make much sense. So if I see 80 level F1 macro, for example, for a binary classifier, I might have some doubts about the model's reliability. More recently, I mean, because LLMs increase our expectations.
Thank you, John. The next question is from Nima Thing, who also actually presented a really interesting work at the TCSS this past Saturday. So he's asking, could network analysis of comment or mention level data be a part of analysis, especially for ideological clusters, to see how semantic embeddings differ in their structural position?
Yes, it might definitely. In our own analysis, we use networks only in sense of likes, and yes, likes were reachable at that moment, but now they're not. So we used retweets, like, or fouls, all that kind of informations to attribute some ideologies to users. But there are also followers and followee information I mean, specifically in Twitter as well. But I'm not specifically expert in network analysis, so I'm not sure how to build a network-based metric. So, for example, whether maybe while building clusters, for example, should we, so the all figures I presented here were province-based, province level. So I didn't show you the user level distribution of my data because I didn't run my analysis at user level maybe mainly. It was a province level data. But if we have user level data and if we have the connections of users, maybe follower accounts as well, maybe like and favs as well. So we may, yes, consider building this kind of framework as well. But specifically, I'm not sure how to do so because I'm not much familiar with specific network-based metrics, I mean. So probably we will need those, I mean.
Okay, thank you. I don't see other questions in the chat box at the moment, so I'm just going to actually open my participants list and see who we have from our seminar series class here. Emre, would you like to ask a question to Fuat Hoca?
Yes, actually, because regarding your last comment as well, you validate the cluster solution against March 2024 local election results, for instance, and there's an 81% accuracy. But clusters and election outcomes aren't the same object. As you mentioned, a province could vote for AKP while having a heterogeneous ideological composition, and your aggregation would still flag it religious right regardless. So, what would a validation that isn't electoral look like? Have you considered maybe survey-based validation against, say, WBS Turkey Wave or Condas barometer data?
Yes, definitely. That might make sense to some extent. So my reviewers, referees thought in the way that just you thought. And this is absolutely right, fine for me as well. It's not much scientific to say that this block directly refers AKP, so we don't know whether it fits or not, or to have a more to say that it's a validation, we should have much more direct fits. So you are right. However, while working with survey data, usually we don't have these province level measures. So surveys represent the nation as a whole. So surveys may be, usually they are nationally representative, but when we look at province level, their data, usually they do not visit while running survey, they do not visit the whole cities as well. So we may only replicate this analysis in survey methodology by running the analysis at user level. So for specific users, does whether these ideologies overlap or not for specific individuals, I mean. So for example, what is the difference between ideologies? So we can extract that kind of measures, ignoring provinces if you look at surveys. I didn't do that, but that might be a good way of trying to validate that kind of results. So whether there will be two cleavages, political and cultural as well, or whether there will be three clusters, CHP, AKP, and let's say Kurdish bloc. So that might make sense, but I didn't run this kind of analysis in this research. That might be a separate research, I mean, and might make a lot of sense. But first, as the first thing, we need a survey that asks very detailed ideological questions, because usually surveys do not include that kind of details. I looked at the most, let's say, inclusive one, TGSS, which is done Zübeyir Hoca. That was nationally representative. That includes more than 500 questions, variables. But even in that survey, unfortunately, lots of critical ideological dimensions were not asked when I look at the data. So maybe as the first thing, we should find, or we should design maybe a new survey. That might be another future agenda for researchers. But I didn't, yeah. That would be a good contribution.
Thank you, hocam. I'm quickly checking the group chat. Şevval is asking, hocam, thank you very much for the presentation. It's nice to see you. I will be using the Poultice dataset in one of my courses, so I wanted to ask a data-related question. How do you deal with representation bias and echo chamber effects in general for Twitter data?
Yeah, very good question. The question that daily I'm trying to deal with. So we usually run. So first, when we first encountered this problem, we looked at the literature, and this literature is mostly written by demographers, not by CSS experts. And we have noticed that they already invented some methodologies for those kinds of problems, representation problems, which is called multi-level regression with post-stratification. So if we have an unrepresentative data, there are some traditional ways to reweight, recalibrate this data. So you may use MRP analysis or some part of it. So if you have user level weights, for example, you should apply post-stratification. But if some of those, in some combinations in your data, you may not be able to find sufficient number of observations, right? You may not have any observations from Yozgat older than 40 female, for example. This category is very hard to find. So for that kind of scenarios, you should shift your focus from post-stratification to multi-level regression with post-stratification technique. But MRP can give you only the aggregate measure, nationwide measure. Post-stratification can give you the user weights as well. So there are this kind of differentiation between different alternatives. But usually we apply those to reweight our data. So here in this paper, I somehow I have done a very simple version of post-stratification by using province level aggregates. So I reweighted my data in provinces by using total number of active users. But I may also consider age and gender as well. I didn't do that because of some technical reasons, technical problems. But in your data, for example, you may also consider age and gender as well. And that probably would carry you to this post-stratification scenario. But we may talk maybe in detail if you want in the upcoming days, whenever you want.
Thank you, hocam. There is a question from Elida. Let me share that in the group chat also, so you can also see it. I'm going to read it out loud. How common is the overlap of users classified under multiple ideologies at once? And are those overlapping groups meaningfully to study on their own to build a more granular segmentation of the electorate?
So let me try to reread that. How common is the overlap of users classified under multiple ideologies at once? And are those overlapping groups meaningfully to study on their own to build a more granular segmentation of the electorate? Good question. Again, it totally depends on ideologies. So we have common ideologies, popular, famous ideologies like Turkish nationalism and Kemalism. It is very easy to find, it is very easy to label a user under those banners because so people less likely self-censor themselves while performing those ideologies. Maybe we can add conservatism to that picture as well. But that's not the case for Kurdish national movement. So it is hard. All of these co-occurrences at user level, I mean, depends on this popularity of or explainability of the ideologies. And second, so this was the first factor that might determine that the frequency of those co-occurrences. And second, it also depend on how many tweets that you collected for each user, because from time to time that might be hard to find. So while we were building this pipeline, we were able to collect uh, all tweets of a singular user. That was possible, but now it's not. So it is now hard to collect all tweets of a single user. For example, if you have approximately 3,000 tweets per user, it might be easier for us to find lots of co-occurrences. But if we have 10 per user, then that will definitely decrease the possibility of those overlapping probabilities as well. Yeah, that might open some new research agenda as well. So we collected lots of data previously, and I'm specifically responding Elida right now. So we may consider looking at those data to see whether those co-occurrences, those overlappings, can say something for the electoral outcome as well. We may try to take a look, but I'm not sure. It totally depends on which time period we looked and which ideologies we consider. At province level, that effect is not a problem because we have lots of users then. But at user level, this tweet level variation introduces problems also because of vocal user problem as well. Sometimes users talks a lot, sometimes they don't. Yeah.
Thank you, Hocam. The next question is coming from Mehmet Badınlı. Hocam, thank you for this really insightful and eye-opening presentation. Building on the way you used PC2 and the positioning, I was thinking of taking the regional principal component to scores and examining their relationship with another variable, as we discussed before with you. Like attitude towards unions, essentially treating PC2 as a proxy for religiosity. Difficult word to pronounce really, or conservatism. With your domain expertise, do you think the loadings are strong and coherent enough to justify interpreting PC2 substantively in that way, or would you be more cautious about giving it that kind of meaning in this kind of an analysis?
I see. So previously we tried lots of validation. So we have lots of validation trials for ideology case. So we tried individual level validation, we tried city level variation and distributional variation, etc., etc. So at user level, we couldn't. Even we had religiosity variable in its religiosity model, piousness model we had. And then we developed secularism. So another ideology, the 11th ideology in our pipeline was secularism, for example. I didn't include that because the score was a bit lower than the acceptable levels, as I mentioned. It was one of the removed ideologies. So if you are considered to do so, to run your analysis at city level, province level, for example, if you combine this digital data with survey data or with some additional other data, I am a bit familiar to your pipeline. That's why I'm asking this question. If you plan to use this city level variation, that's totally fine. You may consider not a single ideology. Almost almost all of these 8 ideologies, we shared the map through Turkey in another paper. I can share the paper with you. So they are a bit validated. So we are a bit more sure about the city level distributions of ideologies. So you may consider conservatism, or you may consider this religiosity dimension as well. That makes sense. Last month, someone else asked me to share city level variations for these PC1 and PC2 for another research project, and I shared. So probably they will use this dimension. Maybe you can also consider that dimension in your research as well. But if you are interested in individual level scores, I do not suggest use them. But maybe we can have a further talk about what kind of model you would like to run.
Thank you very much. There is another question from Nima. Since X's account level location is primarily self-reported, depending on IP address, or maybe even subjected to intentional spoofing using VPN, has this been handled in your sampling approach or considered rather a design limitation from the
Yes.
platform?
Yeah, again, very good, an insider question. So we to detect location information, we run several steps. At the first place, we look at their self-reported geolocations, but almost 10% of users shared their locations in their bio, in their description as geolocated information. And then we search a long list of province districts in Turkey in description and I mean in biofield of users. By doing so, we amplify our data, and then we do it in tweets or tweet locations as well. So this is a long pipeline, and at the end of the pipeline, even for some cases, to detect districts of user, for example, we even looked at networks of those users as well. What I mean by networks, for example, we detected Üsküdar. Üsküdar is a district in Istanbul. So Üsküdar related most famous accounts, 10 accounts, the municipality accounts, maybe the president's accounts, etc., or culture centers accounts, etc. So after using those accounts, we amplified our data by step iterations. So that's how we created our Politus database's location level information. And we also validated that location information by linking some of our users with their survey responses. So we run a survey analysis. We asked them to share their Twitter IDs with us. They shared Twitter handles, I mean. Then we matched these informations together and compared whether we detected correctly their locations by this pipeline. And self-reported, since we compared those results with self-reported responses in the survey. So, and we saw that almost 90% of users, for 90% of users, we detected location correctly. That was cool for us because it is the best performing model for among our demography models, I mean demographics predictions. But for the remaining ones, almost half of the remaining ones, yeah, I mean the half of remaining 10%, we have noticed that we detected their hometowns mistakenly. So we put that user to a location. That user, that people, that human being doesn't live in this country, but his or her hometown is exactly what we detected in the Politus pipeline. So that might increase our score to 95% as well. This is how our location-based filtering or detection worked.
Thank you very much, Hocam. Rümeysa, did you want to ask your question? Unmuting yourself, or you can also type it if it's easier for you. I guess there is either a connectivity issue, or in that case, I think I haven't missed any other questions in the chat box. With that, Hocam, we can conclude, and thank you so very much again for this really fantastic presentation. I'm sure our students also very much enjoyed it.
I thank you, Hocam. Thanks a lot for having me here and allowing me to present my work. I should appreciate for this chance. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Çok
you hocam.
teşekkürler Fuat. Ben de hani son şeyleri böylece izleyebilmiş oldum. Muhteşem. Ellerine sağlık. Çok teşekkürler.
Ne demek? Eyvallah. Ne demek hocam?
Ben şimdi recording'i durdurayım.